Hey guys, how are you? How's everyone doing? Good. Hi, I'm Mary Tom with the Knox County Public Library, and I'm so glad you all are here. I'm particularly thrilled to have Patrick here, who stepped up to the plate when I just put a plea out on Facebook. Does anybody know anybody who knows anything about AI? And he wrote in, so I'm thrilled to have him, and an incredible expert in it, not just somebody who knows a little bit, somebody who works in the field, who has the background in it, who has the background in technology, so we're in for a treat. Before I formally introduce him, I just want to say that we're excited about the summer ahead of us. We've got a lot of things coming on, and there's a calendar up at the front if you want it, but I just want to point out, I know this isn't necessarily a children's crowd, but we are having our Children's Festival of Reading on May 20th. It's our biggest event of the year. Usually thousands of folks come out. We have just a lot of good things in this calendar, so you want to take a look at it. Really happy to be working with the Historical Society on this event and Knoxville Community Media. They used to be community television, but now they're community media, is filming this. So we'll be able to share this series. We're at the very beginning of 4 series. It's a really interesting subject right now that we're going into deeply. So Patrick was born in Chattanooga, went to UT, has been involved in a whole lot of startups. I remember working with him when he was charting people's eyes when they were looking at websites over at the, not the Cherokee building, but the Lee building. Yeah, so he's been in this world for a long time. He's with Lyria now, and he'll tell you more about what he does. So help me welcome Patrick Hunt.
All right, welcome. Thank you for being here today and spending time with us. I'm going to backpedal some of Mary Palm's comments about my expertise in AI and give you a little bit more perspective on that in a couple of minutes. I want to thank the library for scheduling this and for offering me the opportunity to chat with you about this topic. Very important, very timely, very relevant, and thank the East Tennessee History Center for hosting us. So thank all of you for being here. All right. As Mary Palm mentioned, this is a 4-part series. This is the first of those. Every Thursday in May at noon in this facility, we'll cover some aspect of artificial intelligence. Today we're going to do a brief overview, cover a little bit of history, work on working definitions so that we have some common frameworks or shared knowledge about what we're talking about. And we'll go into some typical use cases that maybe get a little bit more technical than I intend for most of this to be, but just to give you a sense of the vast nature of AI and how it's not just ChatGPT, which a lot of people think it is today. Next week, we're going to talk about more specifically the impact on Knoxvillians and Knoxville as a community and Knox County. We'll talk about the technologies like ChatGPT that are more likely to impact people who live and work and play here. But then we'll also take a look at some of the companies and institutions in this region that really leverage AI in big ways and are making an impact on the world in lots of different sectors like healthcare, which Lyria was in. I'll tell you about that a little bit more in a minute, and a variety of other in additive manufacturing and a host of other industries. Then we're going to probably get into the 2 sessions that might be a little bit more controversial or fun or really challenging. In session 3 on May 18th, we're going to talk about issues with AI. We're going to talk about ethics. We'll talk about the regulatory environment, legal aspects of it, especially with generative AI, and a whole host of other topics that come up there. That should be a ton of fun. And then finally, we'll wrap up with what the future of AI holds for us. And we'll do a lot of sort of future casting about where this is headed, and that's where we might get into some of the scarier aspects of what might be happening. And we're going to talk a little bit about today about a resignation that occurred this week and why that resignation occurred. And I heard a couple of people talking about that as you filtered into the room, so that should be a lot of fun. Some quick housekeeping in a moment. Then we'll go through a working definition. We'll look at how other people define AI, and then try to come up with our own for the purpose of this series. I'll walk you through a brief history of AI, and it's brief. I basically cherry pick some important milestones from my perspective that are kind of fun to look at and think about, because it's a very winding road that gets us here to talk about AI today and the science and technology behind it. Then we're going to look at common use cases. I don't want to bore you with that, but there's like 18 million slides that I have on common use cases for application of AI, because there are so many. And then I want to leave time for Q&A and discussion. There's a couple people here I know that actually probably know a little bit more about the technical aspects of AI than I do, and would love to have a conversation and touch on what you're most interested in as opposed to what I'm bringing to the table today. So for housekeeping, first of all, who am I? Mary Palm, thank you for the introduction. I have been working in technology since about 1994 when I built my first website. The web was invented in 1993, so I've been in it for a long time. I'm currently the chief evangelist at Lirio. Lirio is a Knoxville-based company. We use AI to help motivate people to take action for better health across a broad continuum of care, whether it's getting a mammogram, a colonoscopy, following care plan management, medication adherence plans, or whatnot. And we do that with a combination of artificial intelligence and behavioral science to create personalized messaging that gets people to do things when they otherwise might not, right? So we have a team of brilliant scientists in mathematics, computer science, and other fields, plus behavioral science, who are real experts at what we are doing and about AI. And I asked them, after talking to Mary Palm, I said, would you guys be interested in delivering this presentation? And they said, given the audience, given the topic, your role as chief evangelist in translating complex technical subjects into everyday understandable terms, you're better suited than us to do this. Plus, we have a lot more work to do. So that's who I am, why I'm here, and I think hopefully why I'm qualified to talk about this topic with you here. But I do want to say that the choice of the title for the series, A Hitchhiker's Guide to the AI Galaxy, was very intentional. I am the hitchhiker on this AI journey, and so I have tried to create a guide for my fellow travelers. It is not a deep technical presentation by any stretch of the imagination. It is not scientific. We will not have sources, in detailed sources. We will instead get more of a high-level overview of the topics we're going to talk about and hopefully stimulate questions and conversation. We're going to get a little bit meta, and by meta I don't mean the company formerly known as Facebook or the millions of dollars that have been invested in the metaverse, or billions of dollars that have been invested in the metaverse. I'm actually talking about using AI to talk about AI. So it may surprise you, it may not, to know that as I prepared for this series, one of the first things I did was use multiple large language models like ChatGPT to come up with ideas for this series of presentations that I'm going to do. So I took the exact same description of the series that you all saw online or in the newsletter, and I input it into ChatGPT with a prompt and asked it for a 35-minute presentation on, a brief history of AI, working definition of it, and typical use cases we're going to talk about today. I did that with GPT 3.5, with GPT 4. If you don't know what these are, don't worry, we're going to talk about it in more detail. With an alt GPT version and a couple of others to compare the differences, see what I was seeing in those. We're not going to get into those differences in detail, but it was very helpful to prepare for today's presentation and topic. Now, what I will tell you about that is it is an amazing research assistant, right? To use this to create an outline of slides, to create an actual narrative text. But I am not using those outlines in that text. I use it as research and input into the presentations that I'm giving today and in the next 3 weeks, right? And it is fascinating. It is dramatically different than going to Google and typing in some search terms, picking from a set of links, and digging the information out of those links, compiling them. Instead, you get a fully formed narrative document with human readable text that is generally quite good at delivering accurate and reliable information except when it hallucinates. We'll go into that some in a couple of weeks. And it's a very powerful tool. So I don't necessarily think, and I heard Scott Galloway say this on a podcast that actually literally dropped yesterday, I don't actually think that AI is coming to take your job. I think people who really know how to use AI are coming to take your job. And if you think of AI as a research assistant or a legal assistant or a writing assistant, especially GPT and other generative AI, I think you'll have a different perspective on what we can do with these technologies. And then when we get to the fourth in the series, we can talk about what could happen adversarial to those purposes when we do that. But there are some fantastic examples, especially on Twitter. Yes, I still look at Twitter from time to time, of people who are using generative AI to write software. But again, it's not 100% accurate, it's not 100% right. The software engineer still has to review that code, still has to change it, still has to test it, and still make it work. But it is dramatically improving their productivity, and so it's a really helpful tool in that regard. And by the way, if you do know what ChatGPT is, ChatGPT Plus is a significant upgrade over ChatGPT, I can't say it all the time, 3.5, which is the free version. So I highly recommend, if you're in a writing field or you do any writing in your work, pay for the upgrade to Plus. It's worth it. Now, I'm not using image generative AI in today's talk very much, but I did want to use an example just to show you what it could create. OpenAI's image generative AI product is called the DALL-E, D-A-L-L-E, so I use Salvador Dali as my example. And you can already see there are incredible results coming out that major media publications are using on their websites and print materials and whatnot. And this and large language models like ChatGPT will be a big part of our legal discussion in 2 weeks. But I did want to show you what's possible and just know that all I did was type this into a box on a web page and it generated 4 different images, including the one that you see here. Pretty compelling, pretty fascinating. It's remarkable compared to what we've ever had before. And as I mentioned later, I want to leave plenty of time for questions and answers at the end of today's session. So when you see this picture again, that will be the time to raise your hand or shout out your comment when we get to that point. So that's housekeeping. So let's get into a working definition of artificial intelligence. If you research the definition of AI today, either through scholarly articles or through just publicly accessible websites that cover technology, for example, you're going to get a wide variety of definitions of AI. And so I wanted to cover 2 or 3 of those today and then try to come up with a more simple, easy to understand framework for that definition for our purposes. So this first example comes to us from IBM, who was a pretty early mover in AI with a product that they call Watson today, has been around for a number of years. Very big company, as you know, IBM, a long history in technology. Some things aren't as successful as others in those types of environments, and they've never really gotten a super strong foothold in AI, but they continue to invest in it and do R&D in the field and have a lot to contribute to the body of work about AI. It's just they haven't been as successfully commercial in that space as they might have hoped, I think. And you can see their definition at the top above the Discover Watson Assistant blue button. AI leverages computers and machines to mimic the problem-solving and decision-making capabilities of the human mind. If you read a little bit further, it quotes John McCarthy from a 2004 paper. We're going to talk about John McCarthy in a minute when we talk about history. It's the science and engineering of making intelligent machines, especially intelligent computer programs, right? So that's one definition. And you'll note, I think, in this, computers and machines or software and machines, and that's going to be a common theme of the two, and I'm going to challenge that definition when we get to our own working definition. Here is Britannica, Encyclopedia Britannica version. It's a really great resource, by the way. If you don't use it, you want to learn about a subject with all the opportunities down the left-hand side. Theirs is the ability of digital computer or computer-controlled robot to perform tasks commonly associated with intelligent beings. Right? So again, here's the difference between software and machines coming up in this definition through the use of the term robot, but an expansion beyond human intelligence to intelligent beings, right? So that's an interesting difference in these. And finally, the all-knowing Wikipedia describes AI as intelligence, which they define as perceiving, synthesizing, and inferring information demonstrated by machines as opposed to by humans, right? So again, humans, machines, and computers. These are the common themes in all of these definitions of AI. Now, ChatGPT has an opinion on the definition of AI as well, as you might expect. So I asked it. And it's the development of computer systems and software that can perform tasks typically requiring human intelligence. So again, computers, but more specifically focused on the software side of things. It is a piece of software, so it's a little bit biased. So how do we sort of analyze all of this and distill it down into our own working definition that we can use for the purpose of the rest of today's session and the other sessions we have about AI in the future? I'm going to propose this definition: software that approximates human intelligence. So one thing you'll see is that I have tried to simplify it dramatically. A second is that I've gotten rid of the idea of computers and machines, although software doesn't run without computers, so you can't do away with it entirely. And I have included human intelligence as opposed to intelligent beings, because I think that's really where most of the focus is on the development of AI. Not that it can't be used to approximate the behaviors or actions of other intelligent beings, but where most of the research and application of AI is in human intelligence. I specifically use the word approximates, and this is where things get kind of interesting, right? And maybe in our future casting in session 4, we'll dive into this a lot deeper. But today, artificial intelligence does not mimic, replicate, or do what humans can do. They are not able to be as creative and insightful, right? So if you use a large language model to write a 60-minute presentation on AI, it might not be the most creative, it might not be best tailored to the audience that you have, it might not bring in personal experiences. It can't bring in your personal experiences unless you prompt it to do so, right? So I use the word approximates because it only gets part of the way there. Now, we're at a massive inflection point at this moment in time with the explosion of generative AI last year and early this year. The game has changed, and I think that's only going to accelerate other development of AI. So this word approximates is going to get smaller and smaller and smaller in this working definition that we're using because of the rapid escalation of development that I expect to occur. So that's my proposal. You guys can agree or disagree with it. That's one I wrote after reviewing a bunch of others. I feel pretty good about it, and that's how I'm going to base the rest of the talk and the other sessions that we have. Now, importantly, I didn't use the word algorithm. An algorithm is basically a set of repeatable step-by-step instructions and rules, right? It doesn't have to be a computer algorithm, right? That could be written down on a piece of paper about something you do at your house every day, or your exercise routine, or your meditation routine. Could be an algorithm. But it's most closely associated these days with software, of course. And AI and software that approximates human intelligence leverages algorithms, more than one in almost all cases, or at least a very complex one in some potential cases, as a set of step-by-step, repeatable, concrete set of rules or instructions to do the job that it's designed to do. And they're not the same. All AI has algorithms, not all algorithms are AI, okay? And a lot of people hear the term algorithm or closely associate the two as the same thing. They're not quite the same thing, and that's about as deeply technical as I'm going to get in this discussion. And then finally, if we don't like that definition, we can just give up and say there is no AI, which somebody did a couple weeks ago. All right, so let's talk about a brief history of artificial intelligence. And again, as I said in my opening comments, I just cherry-picked some milestones that I thought were interesting and relevant and fun. This is a very complex story. There could be tomes of information written about the history of AI with lots of details and curves in the road. And so I'm really only going to give you some brief highlights. How many of you seen the movie Imitation Game? Really fan. If you haven't seen it, I highly recommend it. I don't know where you can catch it today. It's a fantastic movie, but it's about the story of Alan Turing. And the Turing test is one of the seminal moments in the development of AI. In 1950, Turing proposed that a system was intelligent if a human evaluator could not tell if the language was from a human being or a computer, right? That was the Turing test. I can't tell if the language I'm looking at, the conversation I'm looking at, if one of the participants is a computer and one is a human, and I can't reliably predict which is which, then I have passed the Turing test. And this is really one of the earliest moments when we talk about computer intelligence or artificial intelligence. So as early as 1950. Now you have to understand, there were things happening before that moment, right? That's a very that's a very easy to grok or very promotable idea, but there had to be so many conversations and research and writing done before 1950, so it goes back even further, but that was a big moment in time. In 1956, a group of scientists gathered for what is considered to be the very first conference on artificial intelligence at Dartmouth, and I believe John McCarthy, who I mentioned when we looked at the IBM definition of AI earlier, is the person most widely credited with first using the term artificial intelligence to mean, by and large, what we know it as today. And so that was the very first conference on AI. I can't remember the full name of the conference. But that is the group that organized that conference and led that discussion at the time. In 1961, a robot appeared on The Tonight Show with Johnny Carson and conducted the orchestra. But that robot, called Unimate, was primarily an industrial robot used in manufacturing. So put on the manufacturing floor, could articulate, move things, put things together, but for promoting it, made an appearance on The Tonight Show. And then in 1964, you guys have all, I'm sure, heard the term chatbot, but in 1964, what is widely considered, again, to be the first instance of a chatbot called Eliza was created, more as a proof of concept, but it was in the area of psychotherapy. So the idea is that you would talk to Eliza about what troubles you were having, and you would get feedback and advice. And if you read a lot of the screenshots that you can find online from Eliza and those that were built subsequently based on the same pattern and the same idea, they weren't very good at it at the time. If you use chatbots today, and if you use things like ChatGPT, you'll find that they're actually quite good in many cases in their area of domain expertise. Then there's a period which is referred to as AI winter. In the mid-70s to the mid-90s, funding dropped for AI research, dropped precipitously. So projects weren't happening. People couldn't do the research because they didn't have the funding to do the research. And so they refer to that as AI winter. Now that's the second AI winter that most people refer to. I remember the first AI winter, but it was a 20-year period where very little happened in the progression of artificial intelligence, again from the mid-70s to the mid-90s, really about 74 to about 94 by most accounts. I have a really hard time, by the way, of envisioning a third AI winter, given again this inflection point that we're at and how useful it is, how commercially feasible and viable AI can be in lots of instances, and for other reasons. I just can't see that happening. Maybe I'm wrong, but I don't think we'll have a third AI winter. So we come out in the 90s then, the mid to late 90s, and there's a number of other developments that occur to really sort of advance the conversation as it relates to AI. Some of these might start to be recognizable to you, even if you're not familiar with this field at all. In 1997, Deep Blue, which was a precursor to IBM's Watson, defeated Garry Kasparov, the world chess champion, in a chess match. Now you can see Deep Blue's software interfaces and keyboard over on that display in the upper right-hand corner. There's actually another human being on the other side of the chessboard who inputs the move that Kasparov made into Deep Blue, and then Deep Blue recommended to that person the move that they make. Now Kasparov had beaten Deep Blue once or twice before this occurred in 1997, and so this is what I meant about IBM being very deeply involved in the research and doing a lot of innovative work, not necessarily having as much commercial success as they envisioned or wanted to, but they definitely had products and solutions on the market that were doing pretty fascinating things. You'll notice that I'm going to end this section with another game as a seminal moment in the history of AI as well. But before that, in 1999, Sony released a robot dog called AIBO, A-I-B-O, so artificial intelligence, is the beginning of that name. And I think they still sell a version of it today. Like they've stuck to it all of these many years, not only as a consumer product, and maybe it's taken on different forms since that time, but as an R&D opportunity, right? And so it can obey commands, it can do things like fetch, it can do things like roll over or sit and stay. A lot of fun, and if you go back and you look at the history, the evolution of the design of IBO is pretty fascinating too, and how it changes. Sometimes it looks a little more playful, and sometimes it looks a little more menacing in its design vocabulary. It's a lot of fun. In 2014, Eugene Goostman, the weirdest creature in the world, was considered to have passed the Turing test. It was a chatbot. It was evaluated by a panel of judges, and over a third of the judges were fooled by the text that was generated by Eugene. Now, Eugene had a distinct advantage in appearing before judges in that he was a 13-year-old non-native English-speaking Ukrainian. And the judges were mostly native English-speaking judges, and so you could see how the external factor of this person's identity could actually influence a judge's opinion on whether that person did a really good job or whether it was a computer or a human being that was speaking. So I think there's a little bit of an unfair advantage, but it's still a dramatic evolution in the ability of chatbots to fool human beings as to whether they're human or not. And then finally, Google released a product called AlphaGo, and in 2017, it defeated the world champion in the game of Go, which you can see here. I can't remember his name, but beat that human in a similar challenge to the chess challenge with Garry Kasparov. And so I think one of the more interesting things about the history of AI, especially after the second AI winter to me, is the application of AI research to games and fun as proof of concepts for what we're doing, right? So they didn't seem threatening, right? They weren't scary at the time because they were all wrapped up in games and fun and entertainment and things of that nature, right? So why be worried? We'll talk about that later. Now, in 2022, and this year in particular, something called generative AI really changed the game in a lot of ways, right? So earlier last year, solutions like Dolly that I mentioned earlier and Midjourney were released. And these are AI products that allow you to type in a prompt. And a prompt is just an instruction. Type in a prompt and get an image, an original, unique image as a result. You can tell what kind of style, what kind of characteristics, subject matter that you want that image to represent. You can say it's in the style of Salvador Dali or other artists like I did earlier, maybe impressionist style, or photorealistic. And you will get amazing results from this generative image AI. And again, there's all sorts of legal issues wrapped around that because you have to train these AI models with data, and you have to have lots of data. And so where do you get that data? Do you pay for that data? We're going to cover all of that again in session 3 in more detail. But then in November, I think, or December, a company called OpenAI released what's called ChatGPT, which you've heard me reference previously. ChatGPT allows you to visit a web page, enter some text, an instruction set, a prompt, which is now a more common word used to describe that, and get text as a result. So in the same way that the image AI solutions have used some huge database of images to train it so it knows how to respond to your prompt, large language models like ChatGPT have used vast amounts of text data to do the same thing. Now, what the algorithms in large language model and like GPT are doing is they are predicting the likelihood of the next word to follow the word that is there. And they're doing it with such speed and accuracy as that it can pass the Turing test. It really comes back as human readable. It, in many cases, looks like a human sat down and wrote these words, even though it didn't, right? And that's what we mean by generative AI, and that's what has really caused this explosion in interest and a lot of the fears that are popping up because there really aren't a whole lot of boundaries, right? So I described the work that Lirio's doing. We've got clear sets of boundaries, right? We're working in the health behavior space. We're doing digital messaging. We're trying to motivate somebody to take steps, health actions that are clinically recommended, right? So those are pretty big constraints as opposed to a large language model which you can prompt and ask it to tell you anything, right? That's a big open space, and that's what causes, I think, a lot of that fear. So that gets us to today, and actually, in the last couple of months, you may have heard that there was an open letter to Pause AI published, and as of yesterday, so it was March 22 when it was published, as of yesterday, over 27,000 people had signed this open letter to Pause AI. Now, I haven't signed it. I don't think anybody at Lirio has signed it because there are some problems with this open letter. One, it hardly seems enforceable. The language that they want to pause AI systems more powerful than GPT-4. So how do you define power? How do you understand if something is more or less powerful than that specific example of GPT-4? That seems terribly problematic. The other big issue with this open letter in my mind is certain people signed this with clear conflicts of interest, right? So a guy you may have heard of by the name of Elon Musk signed this letter, right? He's actually an original investor of OpenAI, but it's also well known that as he signed this, he was investing in other powerful AI solutions at the same time. So there's a conflict of interest, right? I don't want OpenAI to have this huge lead in the marketplace because I'm actually investing in this in other places, even though I'm already an investor in OpenAI. And I need them to stop so I can catch up so that my solution will be ready for the market as well. So I understand the intent of this open letter and some of the fear that's associated with it. And there are many people out of these 27,500 and some odd people who signed it that have good intent, but there are enough that don't, that causes any question. And then the idea of enforceability, as I mentioned earlier, not just how do you define what's more powerful than GPT-4 or less powerful than GPT-4, but how do you actually enforce that? I mean, if somebody's in an office and they've got a lab and will you just knock on the door of every home and office in the country and see what kind of work they're doing, or you do some sort of surveillance of them? It just seems really problematic. The best thing about this open letter, though, is it really raised the awareness and really started conversations occurring about what we can and should do about AI. I referenced this earlier, but actually this week, I think it was Monday, Jeffrey Hinton resigned from Google. He is one of the longest serving scientists focusing on AI, brilliant scientist, and he basically resigned over concerns about the future AI and the damage that it can do to society. So again, another event just this week that occurred that really heightens the profile about the potential problems that we will face with the development of AI over time. And again, we'll get into that in session 4 in detail. And then just yesterday, is today the 4th? Yeah. Oh yeah, May the 4th be with you. I totally forgot that. Just yesterday in the New York Times, Lena Khan talked about regulating AI. So all of these things I think are worth a read. Regulation is coming for AI. I don't know when and I don't know exactly what it's going to look like, but you can better believe that the federal government here in the United States and in other places, I think one European country already released some form of regulation just recently, but you can bet that's coming. So this is just the beginning salvo, the opening salvo, if you will. All right, I'm going to quickly get through some typical use cases just to give you a sense of the vast scope of AI, the different technologies, and the different ways that are applied to problems, so that we can spend a little bit of time on Q&A today. And by the way, if you do any amount of research on this, different people categorize all these things differently. So this may not align one-to-one with your understanding. Some of this is not necessarily how I would propose it completely. So just know that there's some malleability to this topic and how we talk about it. In this example, and you'll see this often referred to as weak, strong, and super, as opposed to weak, general, and super. But what we're really focused on today and what really exists in most examples is weak AI, meaning that it's focused on a very limited problem to solve or a limited solution to deliver. The ideas of strong or general AI and super AI are what I think most people start to get really scared about. Like, can a machine, powered by software, bless you, actually start to act and think like a human, reason, solve problems, be creative, right? Have emotion. That's where fear really starts to set in. And I think we're kind of far away from that, but it's definitely worth keeping top of mind and being concerned about. We're focused for the rest of these use cases on weak AI, specified for one task for the most part. Machine learning. Machine learning is a subset of AI. Machine learning, a form of machine learning called reinforcement learning is what Lirio is using in our work. And I'll talk a little bit more about that next week when we talk about Knoxville companies and institutions that are focused on AI. But there's, you see it here, and you don't see anything, you see robotics, self-driving cars, et cetera, under reinforcement learning. That's nothing like what we're doing in hyper-personalizing digital messaging to move somebody to better health. So it's a very novel use of reinforcement learning that Lirio is actually doing. And then there's supervised and unsupervised learning, and you can see how these kinds of things are used. So supervised learning, predicting housing prices, right? This is something that Zillow uses, right? Zillow has vast, huge amounts of data about houses, the number of bedrooms, the number of bathrooms, their zip code, when they last sold, all the comparables to that. And they use all of that in a form of supervised learning to come up with their Zestimate, which is the Zillow estimate of what a home's value is worth, given all those factors, right? So that's an example of supervised learning. In unsupervised learning, you see anomaly detection as one of the examples. So this is the idea that something's wrong, I don't know what it is, how do I figure out what that is? So this unsupervised learning of AI is a way to do that. Then there's this idea called deep learning and convolutional neural networks. I know it's going to trip over that. But facial recognition, right? If you have an iPhone that doesn't still have a home button, then you're probably using facial recognition to unlock the iPhone to use it, right? So that's an example of convolutional neural networks. Image classification can be done in other ways as one, but how does images.google.com know what a cat is when I put cat in the search box, right? That's image classification. So I'm not sure exactly which technology Google is using for that, maybe even a combination of those. And then recurrent neural networks, natural language processing, which is a lot of what GPT or large language models are doing as well. Very quickly, expert systems are used a lot, medical diagnosis, financial planning, and legal decision making. I think legal decision making is going to be really challenged by large language models like ChatGPT, and that's why I had legal assistant up in that role for AI. And I think there's some really fascinating work in expert systems to come. Robotics, this probably makes intuitive sense to everybody here, but how do you get a machine to act more like a human? You use AI to give it a set of inputs and train it to be able to walk across the floor and pick up a ball and bring it back to its human, or to assemble a smart car that is itself capable of driving autonomously, which is another form of deep learning that we talked about already. Natural language processing, we heard that already. This is the idea of being able to process text or speech and use that as inputs into decision making that the AI does. That chatbots are a great example of that. And then you can see that there's some multilingual content generation for machine translation. We refer to what we call as transcreation, because we might use a solution like this to translate text, but then we have human beings actually go in and evaluate that and make sure it's the right text for the right language, for the right customer. And then computer vision. Computer vision is used a lot in autonomous vehicles. So you've heard a lot about self-driving cars from Tesla. There's a company out in San Francisco called Cruise that actually has deployed self-driving cars that you can call like an Uber and have it take you somewhere. They've been a lot more successful in autonomous driving than Tesla's been, by the way. But that's coming. The idea of self-driving cars is very quickly approaching. That technology has seen huge investments by not just the name like Tesla that you've probably heard about, but companies like Ford and General Motors as well. So that's it. The answer to the definition of AI and everything is 42. So with that, I'll take your questions. Yeah, Mark.
So there's over the years, there's been great leaps in technology and a lot of promises that came along with that. Big data was a big thing. Big data is gonna be great because it's gonna serve you with better results based on what it is, on what whatever your query is, whatever you're looking for. It's gonna give you better, more refined results because it's pulling data from all over the place. And then the problem I see with a lot of that kind of stuff is, then the sales department gets involved and it starts skewing the data, and it takes, before the promise is reached, it's already, you want to be profitable, like, obviously, I mean, that's a big part of, why people are putting so much work into these things, right, is because, they want to see the profitability. But that seems to always want to take over before the promise is delivered. And I just wonder, if you see is like, is there a good way to get around that, particularly in this use case, before artificial intelligence is feeding you ads more than it's feeding you actual results. You know what I mean?
Yeah. So that's a very interesting question, so thank you for that. ChatGPT is a product of OpenAI that uses GPT, a version or different versions of GPT, which is a large language model that sits behind it, has been the fastest consumer product to be adopted, I think, in history. There was a slide when I was doing my research that showed the adoption of technology products. And it got to 1 million customers faster than any other technology product in history. And it's because it delivers great results. They turned on a subscription model for that. So now you can subscribe to GPT Plus. So you don't have to wait until servers are available. You get preferential treatment in accessing the product. You get access to a newer version of the large language model in version 4. It's better. And you get some other features around that. I think, writ large, we're seeing a pretty big transition from the ad and attention economy to a subscription-based economy. And I think that many of these new AI products will follow the lead of ChatGPT in delivering a fantastic product and charging for it, rather than trying to get attention and selling ads against that attention. And so I think that's a bigger trend that's occurring that probably will address part of the concerns that you have over, the profit motive bastardizing the product, right? So, my thoughts.
First of all, what does that mean? 42, the life.
So the series is called Hitchhiker's Guide to the AI Galaxy. So one of the questions in the book series by Douglas Adams is, what's the meaning of life, the universe, and everything? And the answer is 42. So it's nonsensical. You have to read the book. Yeah.
Your definition where AI approximates human intelligence is not what's causing the concern.
Right.
From what I've read and seen on 60 Minutes and CBS Sunday Morning and the opinion pieces in the Times, is that it's going to supersede human intelligence. And where people can do evil, they will.
Correct.
So I think the fact that supervised human intelligence, AI is great. The people can use it as an aid. Writers can use it as an aid to anything. Students can use it as an aid rather than plagiarizing. The problem with that, though, is from what I've read, it scans the gamut of the internet, comes up with all information, false and true, and will give you that information, false and true. And I'm a Facebook user, but I also know that there's all kinds of crap all over Facebook. News entities that have absolutely no integrity, has nothing to do with the truth, and yet there is a large subset of people that believe it. Because their algorithm continues to feed them the same stuff that they click on.
That's correct.
I worry a lot, although thank God I'm old, but I worry a lot that shortly, and I disagree with you, I think that the geometrics of the evolution of AI is happening so quickly that it will soon supersede human intelligence, and that machines will think for themselves, that will think for themselves, that will think for themselves, and we're going to have this giant machine that many will program to do will and evil. and I know this is session 4, I'm not sure I can come session 4, but how do you regulate that? How do you police that? You can't get into people's conscience. You've seen today that either people have a conscience or they don't, and there are a lot of people who don't. There are a lot of people who have no ethics anymore. AI feeds that proclivity to be ethicless, if you have the propensity to be that way.
I 100% agree with everything you said. My working definition of AI was meant to be a baseline for the discussion and purposefully set up that discussion about the future and where things are headed. And I agree, there are very valid, deep concerns about the future of AI. What you just described to me is the thesis for the movie iRobot. If you've not ever seen iRobot, I highly recommend that you go watch that movie. It's very salient at this moment in time. As is the movie Her. If you haven't seen the movie Her, that's a great movie as well. Both of those are about AI, essentially. One is the scenario you described, implanted into robots, and then someone with ill will programming a master robot to basically to control all the other robots and take over Earth, take over human beings.
20 years.
Yeah. So I think those are all very, very valid concerns. We've only got about 8 minutes left, and that is the whole topic for another, I hope you can make it.
I do too.
I don't know how to regulate it. Lena Khan thinks she knows how. And so we'll explore that in more detail. I don't think anybody really has that answer today. And I think it's going to be really interesting. Somebody, are these follow-ups on the same point?
Yes.
Yeah, yours as well?
No,
Or different? Let's stay on this topic for just a minute and I'll come back to you.
What was the second movie you mentioned after iRobot?
Her, H-E-R. It's about an AI-based assistant, basically a therapy-based assistant, kind of like Eliza, but it's more of a talking solution, not a robotic solution. But it's really good. I can't remember who the actor, very famous actor.
Joaquin Phoenix.
Joaquin Phoenix, thank you. Couldn't remember that. And you had a follow-up, Art,
Yeah, and have you asked ChatGPT?
about how to regulate AI?
It's like, don't worry about it, nothing is wrong.
Probably has a good opinion on that. Okay, next question.
Okay, taking us back to something you mentioned, which was one of your use cases about Zillow. Zillow, as you know, used to have an iBuy program and total failure. So I'm talking about, here we look at AI as being always right. What are the things that could also go wrong? Because this wasn't on the ethical realm. This was more about data and software. And they completely underestimated the pricing with iBuy. So I'm sort of looking at where do humans learn to discriminate between when AI can go completely wrong and when the algorithms can go wrong?
It's a great question. So repeat it slightly, paraphrase it briefly. Zillow launched a program called iBuy where they actually bought houses and sold houses. It's kind of like, is it Opendoor is the competitor in that space? And it failed miserably because they vastly miscalculated the value of the homes as they bought them. And so therefore they couldn't get what they hoped to get when they sold them. So the miscalculation was on the buy side. And they used a form of AI. Most financial disasters are on the buy side. So they miscalculated using their own supervised learning on the value of those homes, and they didn't catch it until it was too late, and they lost tens of millions, hundreds of millions of dollars, shut down the program, and they don't do it anymore. Although I think I've heard that they have actually started to try it again, is what I remember reading somewhere. And so the question was, how do human beings sort of understand or know when and how to intervene when AI gets it wrong? Paraphrase, more or less. Great question. It's sort of the process I use to sort of develop this series of presentations, right? Well, let me first say that these generative AI, especially the large language models, have a tendency to what scientists call hallucinate. They will make things up in the absence of facts, not just pull in the wrong things, but actually make things up out of thin air. And it typically happens in citations. So they will say that, you know, an article in the New York Times said X, Y, and Z when no such article ever existed. And they'll give it a date, and they'll give a citation to that article. So that's where that hallucination typically occurs. But I would tell you that it's on us, right? As human beings, we have to know what the limitations and the opportunities with AI are. And this, by the way, this is part of the answer here, I think, is we got to appeal to our higher selves, right? We have to, that's scary in itself, especially over the last 10 years. But I think it's on us, right? We have to learn and train and understand how these tools are constructed, how to use them, how to apply them when not to, and not rely on them solely to do a thing, but rely on our own intelligence, our own connections, our own ability to research, process, analyze, and conclude that we just have to. There's no other choice. There's no other answer, really. Some people will tell you that the marketplace will sort that out. I'm not necessarily one of those believers.
Proof that doesn't work.
Yeah, that's right.
Not to follow up to that, there are two things in my reading on AI. The first thing is the data, the training data.
Yes.
And there's a term in computer science they call garbage in, it's garbage out. And you have to really focus on the data. And humans are subject to the same fallacy because the training data that we get in, we can generate garbage out also.
Yes.
So that's also true of an AI. So the training data has to be clean, curated, and properly managed in order to get the AI correct. The second thing I would like to make, if you go back and look at the various failures that you've seen, in my opinion, those failures came from the fact that the system was not tested. And so once you put something in production, it needs to be evaluated and tested. Unfortunately, it's put out in the public. And then when it fails, they see all this coming back. If they had tested that, I believe a lot of those issues would have been caught.
So I agree with the first point entirely. I think that's part of what you were hinting at as well. On the second point, they will tell you they tested them, and they did. They ran simulations like iBuy ran many, many simulations. But until they actually bought a house and couldn't sell it for more than they bought it for, or more than they had in it, they didn't know.
But that's what I'm talking about. You have to do real live testing, not necessarily simulation, because you can't always simulate.
Yeah, that's true. And they probably went all in too fast, right? And so they invested hundreds of millions of dollars in buying homes, as opposed to buying 5 and see if it worked,
Exactly.
and then buying 20 and see if it worked, right? And that was the frothiness of the market, right? The real estate market was going crazy. They figured, get in now, prices are going to. That was the fallacy, right? It wasn't the models. It was the human fallacy that the markets were going to continue to go up, and they didn't.
Right.
Home prices, in some cases, fell again, and in many cases leveled off, and that was the real failing of that.
During this series, are you going to deal with the question of bias at all?
Yes, in session 3 on May 18th, I think it is.
I have one other question.
Yeah.
Based on what you did, what you showed us today, this is like a moving target. Like you probably put your slide or finalized your slide last night because you had like some New York Times article, somebody quit, and so forth. Is that sort of the nature of the beast? Like next Wednesday night, will you be finalizing your slides because of stuff that happened in the previous 7 days?
So next week's a little bit different because we're going to focus on Knoxville. Now, the first half of that talk is about technology that are impacting Knoxvillians, and so then you're talking about lots of stuff, right? Large language models will be one of those things that we talk a little more about. So that half of the presentation, yes, I will be finalizing that actually the morning of, probably, which I did this morning. I literally got up this morning, scanned all of my news sources and information sources to see if there was something worth including today that happened last night or this morning. And I think that will be true of the first half. The second half is a little more of a known, defined thing. You can imagine I'm going to be talking about, ORNL, some work that UT's doing with Lynn Parker, companies like Lirio. There are several other AI-based companies. In fact, Knoxville Entrepreneur Center is having an accelerator this summer with 5 or 6 companies that are early stage startups that are using AI in their products. So that's a little bit more of a known commodity. It's not as dynamic and shifting as fast as some of this other stuff, but absolutely every one of these presentations will be that way. There was just, I'll get to you just a second. Did you have another one? Something someone else said, I wanted to tease the legal ethics bias session in 2 weeks. One of I think it was the description of, just going out there and harvesting as much data as you possibly can, right or wrong, right? So there were 2 or 3 sort of themes on that. One of the legal challenges we're going to look at is, especially with generative AI, is what data did they use to train the model? And there's actually a case in the courts today, because I think it's Midjourney, but it might be DALL-E, was generating results that had image watermarks in them from companies that sell images online. Because they only have access to the version that has watermarks. That's what's publicly available to them. So they went out and scanned image databases that had watermarks, so now the AI is putting watermarks into its results, right? So they have, that seems like a slam door case to me on copyright issues, exactly. Mary Palm?
Can they scan the dark web as well? Is that accessible to these scanners?
I have no idea. It should warm your heart that I know nothing about the dark web. All right, we're over time. Have we got one more question?
Very mundane question, not about AI, but about current media and old school technology. If we're not able to attend each one of these, what will they be available on the website? Will they be available on a YouTube channel for us to watch later since they're being recorded, your talks?
The talk today is being recorded. The future talks will be recorded. They'll be available on Knoxville Community Media, KCM, the new name for the old community TV. And I'm told that they'll be available online within 2 or 3 days of each session.
Online on the library website?
They might embed it on the library website, Mary Palm, but it'll be available on.
I'm trying to put it, but definitely on our YouTube channel, maybe not on our website.
Okay, on the Knox library website, YouTube site.
Yes.
Okay, great.
But definitely on community media, Knox community media. But I'll.
But it won't stay on community
The
television.
gentleman with the camera may be able to give you like a card or some sort of info that
We'll put it on the Knox County Public Library YouTube channel.
Okay.
All right, thank you, everyone. I hope it was informative. This was meant to be, again, the foundation for the next 3 talks. It's meant to build one on the other. I do hope you can make it to the others. Encourage friends and family that you know that are interested in the topic of AI. I will try to leave more time for discussion in the future sessions because I highly value it. You guys had some fantastic questions and comments, and I want to leave plenty of space for that. So thanks again, and I hope to see you next week.